I'm Chris Stashew.
And I'm Jess Byard.
And we are the hosts of The One Season Show, a podcast where we take a look at TV shows that only lasted one season from start to finish.
Each month, we'll tackle several episodes of the show. On this episode, we're kicking off our next show, our third season. I can't believe we've actually made it to our third season this fast. On this episode, we're kicking off our next show, our third season. I can't believe we made it to our third season that quickly. We are tackling something a little different. We're going sci-fi this time. Something that spawned quite the cult following and many arguments as to how the show should be viewed. So make your judgment on whether or not we chose the correct episode listing for 1967's The Prisoner.
Patrick McGoohan is the prisoner, trapped in a strange, terrifying prison.
A lot of people are curious about what lies behind your resignation. They want to know why you suddenly left. A man like you is worth a great deal on the open market. The information in your head is priceless. I don't think you realize what a valuable property you've become. What a valuable property you've become.
Patrick McGoohan is the prisoner.
So before we get to the show, let's talk a little bit kind of about the backstory of the show. Let's talk a little bit about because there's a lot of weird things about the show, a lot of idiosyncrasies about the show. Mm-hmm. Not the least being who got credit for creating the show. So two people have credit for the show: Patrick McGoohan, who plays the lead character number 6, and George Markstein, who who worked on the show and was a writer on the show as well. And there's a dispute as to who has main credit for the show. Some people say McGoohan, some people say Markstein. Reading everything that I've read, I think, you know what they say about success. Success has many fathers, and, failure is an orphan. So...
Well, and especially in like a structure, in a format like this, a medium like this, where is a collaborative process. So obviously, yes, it's there's always going to be somebody who's doing more, who has more invested in the property, who has more at stake. But then you get muddled lines of who had what specific idea that, may or may not have broken the show.
Yeah, it seems to be more of an order of who pitched it when.
Right. So sort of like a Facebook thing, where it's like, we had the idea first, but then you did something with it.
So Patrick McGoohan was working on a show prior to The Prisoner called Danger Man. And
did he stare something fierce in it in there, too?
So Danger Man is kind of like the spiritual prequel to this show, and in some respects, the ending of this show, if some people who worked on it, George Markstein specifically, had their way, it would have tied directly into this show. However, that's not the direction that they went. But that was one of the initial ideas with this show, was to have this show tie into the end of Danger Man, because Patrick McGoohan wanted to be done with Danger Man, and then he moved on to this show. So there's this thing where this show kind of spawned from Danger Man, like kind of out of the womb of Danger Man came The Prisoner, and they were going to try to tie it back to it at the end of the show. They ended up not doing it. But Patrick McGoohan had the idea for this show ostensibly while working on Danger Man, and so it just seems to be the idea of who is getting credit is more about who did it in what order. Did McGoohan pitch it first, or did Markstein pitch it first? And look, if you want to go and read all about it, there's a fair amount of information, kind of, and evidence in both directions. So
the show was, was it relatively well received when it came out? It had success. People seem to like it. Obviously, the end has been talked. I don't know what happens at the end because I've never seen it before. But from what I've read, everything is very controversial about the end sequences. So I wonder if, I wonder how those arguments were falling, while the show was on versus after the show ended.
Sure. Well, and I think ultimately also when you have something where there's a credit dispute and, this show also, on top of the credit dispute, like you mentioned in the opening, there is also this problem with how the show is filmed. So,
I think ordered.
Yeah.
Not necessarily filmed. I think it's how it was distributed.
Yeah. Well, some of the things are... So there are multiple different versions of the sequence. There's the production order that's not the intended viewing order. Then there's the ITC being Incorporated Television Company, which was where this was broadcast on. There's their official sequence. And then there's a sequence from 6 of 1, which is kind of a fan community for the show. And that's the order that we're going to be using for this podcast, is the 6 of 1 endorsed order. It's also the one that's used in the A&E DVDs. And then there's even another one that the AV Club used. So, there's... And look, this is a 17-episode show, so there are a fair amount of episodes to move around. I mean, we kind of ran into that with Kitchen Confidential, where it seemed to be that some of the episodes were completely out of order, to the case where there's characters literally missing from episodes and then they show up in the next episode. So it's a little weird. This is something we haven't really dealt with before on this show, is trying to kind of reconcile the order of the show and what order we want to watch it in, and how that will ultimately affect our appreciation and enjoyment of the show.
Right, yeah, it's the ultimate choose your own adventure before you have any idea of what's going on. Yeah. It's like, completely. Choose your fate now.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm fine. I'm fine with the order that we picked. I think that the people who put this are the more dedicated of fans and more invested in the material than, say, like the ones that are put together by the, television companies. They don't give a shit. They just want people to watch the show. But yeah, I'm fine with the order that we picked. And maybe, those of you out there who have watched this show, if you've watched it in a different order, or if you've watched it in all the orders, maybe you have. I'm sure that there's obviously many people out there who have. Then we would highly be interested in your takes on this. But yeah, I just I came across this show on a whim the other night. A friend of mine I was scrolling through Instagram stories, and a friend of mine that I used to write, with, sorry, I didn't used to write with, but wrote at the same website with, he posted that it was on, he posted like a screen grab. And it just the colors, the era, the 60s look, everything about it kind of just caught my eye. But he said that it was one of his favorite shows of all time and that it was on Amazon Prime. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, I'll check it out. I saw that it was one season. Now, I know that I don't think that this is a one season show in that the way that we're used to it being a one season show. I don't believe that it was actually canceled. I think that it was ended on purpose, but not in not an accepted way.
It tells an entire story.
Right.
From everything that I've seen and read, trying not to spoil the show for myself, but also doing the requisite amount of research necessary. Mm-hmm. It does seem like the show has a beginning, a middle, and an end, regardless of what order you watch it in. So... But yeah, I like you said, this is definitely a little different than what we've talked about in the past, especially just for the age of the show, for the time that the show is set in, and for the subject matter, because we've covered horror and we've covered comedy, and now we're covering sci-fi.
Well, and it's spy sci-fi too. It's like 60s era spy stuff. So if you're familiar with that, it's kind of that really like swinging 60s style. We got cool cars, we got cool music, everything's super Euro. Everybody's dressing really nice and flashy. But it's also British, so it's not like, it's Italian spy stuff, whereas it's super, flamboyant and out there. This is pretty out there and has some flamboyant occurrences, but I kind of love how British it is, just with their stiff upper lip, like everybody's like, yes, well, everything's very weird here, but it would be impolite to say anything otherwise, so we're just going to keep moving on with our lives. And I'm stoked for it. It's a mix. I don't think I've seen like a science fiction spy mashup before.
Well, haven't you seen the Avengers movie from like the 90s?
I have not.
It's so bad.
I'm sure it is.
It's not great.
I guess like what it's like stuff like I wouldn't think like Get Smart or James Bond qualify as science fiction, although they do have like really elaborate gadgetry. So I guess it's adjacent. It's similar, but this is. I also can't tell. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't. I can't tell if this is a sci-fi reality in where like our main character was previously, before he gets taken to this village, he was previously just living his life as a spy, and was it in normal reality, and then he gets taken to this place where everything's a little bit more high-tech and future-y, or is the whole reality set in the future? Because we'll get, as we get into the show, but there's a part where he answers a phone, and the phone's cordless and very, angular and spacey, and he kind of looks at it weirdly. So I didn't know if he's kind of transported, and I guess that's part of what we're figuring out as well. We don't know why he's in this village.
I interpret it as the former, not the latter.
So he was living in a real world.
Yeah, in 67.
Yeah, in real world, actual historical, but you know what I mean. True.
Reality
real 1967, and then gets taken to this more hyper futuristic village that's advanced.
Reality adjacent.
I want to live in reality adjacent.
I think we all do at the moment. Like you mentioned, the order we're going with is the 6 of 1 order. It is on Wikipedia. So if you wanna search that out, it is also the official order that if you buy the complete series mega set off of Amazon, that is the order it is in. We'll also let you know what episodes we're watching in the order that we're planning on watching them in, so that there's not any surprises as well. Because while we would say episode 2 and 3, that's actually different episodes in the order. So.
Right. Yeah. In case you're listening and like us have not watched this show before. Want to follow along and not get screwed up. And they do have them all listed. If you have a lot of time to kill recently, you might want to just watch it in all the sequences, I guess.
So with that in mind, let's talk about the first episode of The Prisoner, Arrival.
Which is notably the only episode that everyone agrees on, and I can see why. It's very clear. It's very clearly the first episode.
The first episode and the last 2 episodes, because while the second to last episode was filmed 6th, it is still widely considered to be the second to last episode for almost everyone. So the first and the second to last and the last are the only 3 episodes that are all more or less agreed on in the order, in the multitude of different orders that you can watch the show in. So the first episode aired June 1st, 1968 on ITC, which, like I mentioned already, was Incorporated Television Company. It was directed by Don Chaffee. It was written by George Markstein and David Tomlin, and it stars Patrick McGoohan, obviously, as number 6, Virginia Maskell as the woman. There's going to be a lot of very kind of just non-specific names. Yeah, exactly. A lot of non-specific names. Guy Dolman as number 2, and then George Baker as the new number 2. And the first episode finds number 6, before he becomes number 6, being taken to a bizarre prison village known as The Village.
Yeah, it's all everything's very basic here. I mean, at least it's, simple. It's not hard to follow. Yeah, but this, for being a spy prison or whatever the hell it is, because I don't know yet, it's pretty nice. Like, this is a picture, aside from how you're treated, but this is a picturesque town. It's very Stepfordy. Like, that's very much how, we talk about this show as we go along and how much it influenced, other entities, other mediums in the sci-fi world. And yeah, it's a very Stepfordy place. You go, all the lawns are well manicured and brightly green. All the buildings are painted in these, freshly colored paints that are, they pop out. Everybody's polite. Everybody's well kempt. Everybody is just going along with their daily life. Everybody seems to be, bilingual or multilingual. And of course, being a spy and not really understanding how you got here, you're going to be suspicious, as is our number 6. But he's also kind of, I don't know, there's a few interesting things that happen throughout the show, direction-wise and delivery-wise, that are a little strange to me, because there are at times, essentially he is trying to escape this entire episode, that's of course, but there are a few times where he seems oddly okay with what's going on. For instance, when there's this sequence, because occasionally he does seem okay with things. There's a sequence when he first meets number 2, when he's being sort of briefed on a little bit on what's going on and why he's there. But when he first meets number 2, wants to is offering him breakfast. And so he's just asking him oh, do you want bacon or sausage? He's like, bacon. You want 1 eggs or 2? 2. I just found that exchange really strange and strangely toned, because it felt like he was like, all right, yeah, I'm not happy that I've been kidnapped and put in this weird town, but I'll totally take some breakfast. That's fine.
Well, I think it's that very British stoicism.
Yeah, right? It is. And that's all throughout the show. And I do love that. And I can definitely understand if you're not a fan of British television, then maybe this isn't for you. But I do enjoy that kind of just everything I say is kind of under my breath and snarky.
Well, and I think going back to kind of this idea of everything being perfect and kind of everything being well contained and not quarantined, but everything has a place and everything is controlled. I mean, the quote that is on the sign that says "questions are a burden to others, answers a prison for oneself." It's just very much don't question collectivism. There is clearly no individualism here in this society. Obviously, they strip you of your name on top of everything else. So,
right? Yeah, everyone's a number.
Yeah, it's very much the individual versus the collective, and that's I mean, obviously that's going to be a massive theme.
Oh yeah.
Throughout the show is the individual man versus the kind of collective society.
Which, yes,
apparently all in cahoots to keep him there for the most part.
From what we can tell, and yeah, his whole number 6's whole identity at this point to us is that he was a spy who has since resigned and is trying, I guess, to just lead a normal life, but much like a story involving something, spy related or mob related or whatever, once you're in with an organization, you're never really out. And this is sort of, I guess, a punishment or I think it's a forced job.
I think it's a way to keep him from the greater populace, to keep him away from maybe divulging secrets.
Right, because I'm getting the feeling that he's going to have to be doing some kind of work for them, because he keeps saying he's resigned, and they're like, no, you're not. That's not going to happen. But they do give him some power in this village. They at least, you can't really go anywhere. There's no other place. There's a scene in this where he meets a clerk. Essentially, he goes into a store and is like, hey, I want a map so I can get the hell out of here. And the guy gives him a small map, and it's just a map of the town. And then he's like, no, a bigger one. He gives him a bigger map, and it's just the town plus the mountains and sea that surround it. So we're entirely shut off from the rest of the world, and he doesn't know where he is. Now, of course, everyone is British. Everyone has an English accent, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's where we are. We could very well not even be on Earth, I guess, or in normal reality.
And having already watched a little bit ahead, it's pretty much more or less confirmed that this is still somewhere in the British Isles.
Okay. It's just some hidden secret base, essentially.
Right. It's, I believe the show was filmed in, I'm going to butcher this, I'm sure. Port Meirin, which is in North Wales. I mean, obviously, it's beautiful to look at.
Oh yeah, like this village that he is in. Like I said, it's nice. It's a beautiful, very Stepfordy place. Obviously, there's underlying terror.
And thankfully, the show was filmed in color, because a lot of the shows at the time, especially in '67, weren't being filmed in color.
No, TV was still very much black and white in the 50s and 60s. It was just cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think that had to do primarily with doing research for this, it had to do with the show kind of going into the American market. American audiences wanted shows that were in color, which, I mean, at the time, 67, I believe, Star Trek is on the air at that time. So
yeah, I believe so, or if not, it would be very soon.
Star Trek went on the air in 66, 67.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of the analog, like that's kind of the turning point for TV, for color, for sci-fi is Star Trek. And so if you want to kind of capture that American audience, you have to be in color. There's not a lot of choice there, obviously. So
no, and I mean, when you have a show that's like dealing in sci-fi, I want to see that in color. And I mean, sure, like you have episodes of the first few seasons of Doctor Who are black and white. A lot of, like you said, I think The Avengers was in black and white. I can't remember if it was or not. I
believe some of it, maybe not. I'm not sure.
But thank God this is in color, because this, I mean, I hope that this continues. I can't imagine it won't. But the cinematography and just the color palette and the lighting and everything, just the whole look of this show is rich. It is super layered. And yeah, you see all the influence. I mean, the whole sequence in the dome where number 6 is meeting number 2 for the first time and sort of being debriefed. Number 2 is like sitting in this awesome egg chair, this awesome revolving egg chair, and it's everything super mid-century modern aesthetic and furniture, but there's also these different light patterns going on in the walls behind him that's sort of like a light show or a lava lamp. There's all kinds of just interesting things to look at, and also that dome very much, speaking of Doctor Who, looked like the inside of the TARDIS, just without the heart of the TARDIS, essentially.
No, it's the production value on the show for 67 is beyond impressive.
Ooh, it's popping.
I mean, even the intro, the opening sequence alone with him driving that Lotus 7 Series 2 is, that makes it feel like a movie. It doesn't even feel like a TV show.
No, the opening sequence to this movie, the opening sequence to this show, while, I mean, it's a little sudden, and it's not, it's just a little weirdly edited, I think, but I love it. Like, I just love the music. I love the car. I have a weird, like, affinity for aerial shots of European traffic in movies. I don't know why. I just really enjoy that. I love watching, like, just, all the roundabouts and the aerial stuff in, like, Italy, and watching people cruise around in those little, in tiny cars all over Europe. I don't know. I enjoy it. It makes me happy. And this show, I really hope, and I can't imagine that it won't, but I hope it keeps up at least this, aesthetic and quality, and because at least, if nothing else, if the show ends up going, way downhill and you and I end up pissed off at the end of it, like apparently a lot of people were, at least it was a nice art piece.
It's nice to look at, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any way we don't talk about, I think we have to, there's no question, we have to talk about Rover, which is the security guard.
My favorite.
For the village, which is a giant meteorological weather balloon.
Yep. That just rolls people over like the Blob, and I fucking love it.
It, like, suffocates people?
Yeah, it's ridiculous, and it looks ridiculous because it is just it's a huge balloon just running into people, but the implication of that is really awful. Like, being suffocated to death by a sentient balloon would be pretty shitty.
Yeah.
And it's just one. They just have the one, as far as we know.
Yeah, it's, it might not sound particularly intimidating, but it definitely is. I mean, it also obviously serves as kind of a deus ex machina within the show.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Because it's like, oh, here comes the rover thing, and it's bouncing around and just kind of, like suffocating people or engulfing them. And I mean, it's dorky and it's goofy, but it is both of those things in an endearing way that also works with the aesthetic of the show.
Yeah, because, honestly, the show, there's a lot of things in it that come off as funny or cheesy or goofy. And part of that is it just being, the time in the 60s. But the show never really, I can't tell if it's trying to play some things for laughs or not. And I kind of like that. And Rover sort of, the show, I mean, I know you've seen it, Chris. I don't know if our audiences have, but the movie Rubber, about a sentient tire. Mm-hmm. And the sort of overlying themes and messages in that movie where it's like, yeah, it's just happening because it doesn't matter. It's just happening. Doesn't matter why. It just is. And I think that this show really, it works for them. And that's a hard thing to pull off, that nice blend of actual intrigue and interest and, some drama and actually pulling us in to find out why he's here and what's going on. And obviously there's some sinister stuff going on and people are dying or being killed. But there's also the sentient balloon. But it doesn't ruin the mood. At least not for me, it doesn't.
No, I mean, again, it works within the constructs of the show and what it's going for. I mean, we may get to the point where it feels very much like Deus Ex Machina or kind of like a plot trope. It just kind of shows up and stops him every time.
Right. Well, I mean, there has to be something that stops him from leaving the village. Or at least getting even to a point where you could attempt to leave the village. Because he never makes it out of, the main town. He never even makes it into the mountains, that are featured on the map. He's just constantly
right. He's
detoured back into the town.
And trying to escape. And look, how many times you have to get in a helicopter or get in a boat and realize that they're somehow being controlled by...
Well, hey, when you're a spy, I'm sure that really fucking galls you. You got tricked, you got taken to this island, and you can't escape.
I mean, in the opening sequence where all of a sudden his room gets filled with smoke, it's just like, dun, dun, dun. He's like, ah, damn. Somebody put, like you said, you don't want to have someone put one over on you. You want to be the one to put one over on someone else. I mean, the way I look at it is I'm imagining this character as like a James Bond-esque character, without some of the problematic things that James Bond, has. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you what, though. I really, and as an American viewer who hasn't had a lot of exposure to him as an actor, I really like Patrick McGoohan as number 6.
I do too, and I mean, there's some silly, that's the kind of, I like it because he's very serious in the show, but I sense a little bit just underneath of it that he knows what he's doing, and I like that. There's just some cheekiness about it. That I think is very British. Yeah, but there's a very British, I don't know, it kind of makes me laugh because throughout this show, there's so many close-ups and medium close-ups of his face, just
his eyes
staring, just fiercely, just staring, angry, it's just, I don't know, it makes me laugh, but it's also, I like him. He's charismatic. He's I believe him as a spy. I believe him, I buy into him trying to pull off all the escapes and all of this stuff. I do think that sometimes he's, I mean, this is, as a character, it's a good flaw, and it shows us that he's got some, stuff going on with him as well, because there's a sequence where, towards the beginning, when he's kind of shown to his quarters, and everything's set up exactly how it needs to be, and there's this radio that's playing opera that just keeps getting louder, or classical or whatever, it just keeps getting louder and louder and louder, and he tries to destroy it, but the music still plays, and this woman walks in who's his maid, essentially, and asks what she can do, and he just kind of goes off on her, and was like, why, what's wrong with you? Why would you not question why you're here? Blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I've learned best not to.
This is all I've ever known.
This is all I've ever known, and I've learned that it's better not to ask questions. So, hey, why don't you stop being a douche to me the first time you meet? So, and I kind of, that's just a part of his character. That's
Sure.
something that's a flaw in his character, that he's probably gonna, his temper is probably something that we're gonna learn more about. We don't know why he resigned as a spy. We don't know why because throughout it, we're told that he was, essentially like a James Bond style. Like, he's a great spy. Like, he's just like the best spy ever. And then all of a sudden he decides to resign. So there's some intrigue in that too, just in his own story. And I'm very interested to see how the rest of this progresses.
Well, and again, obviously that's going to be the kind of underlying thing that drives the plot. I hope that there's an underlying narrative, but again, at the end of the day, when it's a show from 1967, look at a show like Star Trek. That show didn't really have an underlying narrative. Kind of stories throughout a season is a recent construct.
There's like story arcs are now more of a draw than they used to be.
Exactly. People yearn for a connected storyline, even in their sitcoms. So, but the other thing that we should talk a little bit about is essentially the character of number 2 is recast every episode.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of one of the underlying kind of repeating themes in the show is number 2 is recast.
Right. Everybody's always replaceable.
Yeah, so Guy Dolman and then George Baker are the number 2s in this episode, and then in the next episode we're talking about it's going to be a different actor, and then the episode after that it's another different actor. So just prepare yourselves for that.
Interesting.
Because, again, it also kind of reinforces this notion that they're going for with the show of kind of this idyllic community, but at the same time, like, not everything is as it seems, clearly.
Right.
And I think that's okay. Like, it works for the show, but at the end of the day, the only way it works for this kind of show is because it is this kind of show.
Right.
And if it wasn't this kind of show, it wouldn't work. You couldn't watch Star Trek, and all of a sudden, every episode, Spock is being recast.
No, because it's not in the character. In this character of number 2, and especially with no name, we know what his function is, and essentially that's to basically just he's on number. Yeah, he's an antagonist for number 6. Like that's essentially what he's meant to be.
But he's also the agent for number 1, the unknown number 1 as of right now.
Always the unknown. Another aspect I like of this is the score, which is sort of, I don't know if you have ever seen the movie Tourist Trap, but that score to it is very similar to this, and kind of like the bops and buzzes and whistles and corks.
Tourist Trap featuring Chuck Connors?
Yes, that
Chuck
Tourist
Connors
Trap.
Of Werewolf fame.
Yes, exactly.
Chuck Connors of kind of Werewolf fame. Couple episodes of Werewolf.
Few episodes of Werewolf fame. You should check out Tourist Trap.
I've seen like the first 10 minutes of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's real weird. But that same kind of just sort of, I guess the best way I can describe it, how it sounds to me, is like circus or fair music, where it's a lot of like pops and buzzes and whistles and whizzes and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
It's also composed of, I can't remember what the song is specifically, but of sort of children's music. Recognizable, little ditty. Yeah, lighthearted, like kind of little family-friendly ditties that play all throughout this village all the time. And the village is very much set up like you're walking around like a zoo or a botanical garden or something, with all the signs that point in various directions for various things. And you have people driving golf carts all over to take you to your destination. It's like you're on like this big weird resort / a hotel thing. It's very strange, but it's also, I don't know, everything looks very
manufactured. It's manufactured.
It's very manufactured. It is absolutely manufactured.
So Patrick McGoohan reprised his role as number 6 on another famous TV show. Do you know what TV show that is?
I have no idea.
The Simpsons.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so there is an episode of The Simpsons called The Computer Wore Menace Shoes. And I didn't know what show they were referencing in that episode, but they reference this show in that episode and in The Joy of Sect, another episode of the show where they have Rover in that episode killing Hans Moleman.
Shit, I feel like I remember. I'm going to have to check those out after we do this.
Yeah.
I'm also going to have to track down the documentary that they did on this. There's like a 90-minute. I don't know if it's about anything or whatever, but
on the episode, The Computer Wore Men as Shoes, Homer even goes to the village because he's like, I think the whole premise of the episode is he gets a computer and he starts spreading information, thinking that it's all fake because this is in 2000, so kind of right at what we would consider to be kind of the height of the introduction of the internet. And he just starts spreading information and kind of conspiracy theories and stuff. And he ends up creating stuff, like hitting upon things that are true. And so he gets taken away to the village where people who know too much are taken.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. They also, I'm sure you saw this, they also did a remake of the show into a miniseries in 2009.
Yeah, I did. I read about that. I haven't looked anything really up about it or to see, but that's
starring one Jim Caviezel.
Interesting.
And Jim Caviezel plays number 6, and Ian McKellen plays number 2.
Now that I would like to see.
I would.
That would be worth watching it, I think, just for that.
Here's the problem. Apparently, it was not very good. So
that's why I said I think it would be worth, because I kind of figured, especially 2009. That's a weird. I don't know.
That's kind of like right at the beginning of where TV had its like second golden age.
Right. Yeah. I bet I think around that time was when Doctor Who and Sherlock and like kind of the BBC boom was happening for American TV audiences. Like everybody, that for that brief moment in time where it was a couple of years of nothing but Doctor Who and Sherlock fandom happening.
And then 2008, I believe, is also when Game of Thrones started, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the golden. I think they with the golden age of television, or the second golden age of television. I think
that was that like Game of Thrones, Mad Men, like those shows kind of heralded in that. And this show was probably trying to kind of piggyback off of that. I'm going to try to see if I can find it, track it down, and maybe give an episode or two a watch. But yeah, I would assume it's not very.
Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, from what we've watched so far, and I've watched a couple episodes already into this, I'm enjoying this show. And the way I look at it is if I'm enjoying a show now in 2020 on its own, I don't need you to remake it. I can just watch the original.
Right. Just make it available. I mean, now it is available. Thank you, Amazon Prime.
I mean, this is easily available. And I would assume in this day and age, everybody has Amazon Prime. If you don't,
for the most part.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, but at the end of the day, if you have Amazon Prime, you can watch this on Prime. You should watch this on Prime. But again, take into account that the easiest way to watch this is not the order on Amazon Prime, because the Amazon Prime order is its own
thing.
Interpretation order. So
it's the Bezos version. Bezos approved.
Jeffy B approved. So
Jeffy B and Jeffy D.
So what?
Inside joke for no one.
Inside joke for the two of us, and that's it. So on the next episode of the one season show, which episodes of the show are we talking about?
On the next episode, we are going to be talking about episodes called Free For All and Dance of the Dead, which I'm intrigued just by Dance of the Dead's title.
And again, I would like to point out that those episodes are technically, I think, episode
like 4 or 5 or something.
That's technically episode 3 and 7. So.
Okay. Free For All and Dance of the Dead.
Yeah. This whole thing's a little bit of a pain in the ass.
We'll just go by titles.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about Free For All and Dance of the Dead. But again, this wasn't our choice. This is kind of what we're doing to make sure that we're getting the best that we can out of our first time watching this show. And I'm going to try to track down there's a graphic novel that they did a couple years ago.
Oh, I'd be interested in that too.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, we're going to probably talk about the documentary at some point. There's a lot of ephemera associated with the show that, Kitchen Confidential had the book, and obviously we talked about that a couple times as I had read the book, and Werewolf, not so much ephemera, but this show has definitely a lot of ephemera associated with it, so we'll do our best to kind of bring our opinions on those things as well. So until then, where can people find you, Jess?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at writerjessbyard, and you can find me on your show, Chris, the Culture Cast, twice a month, where we're talking movies. You can find me, and bonus announcement, we are going to be starting a new podcast, Chris and I, a little different from what we're usually talking about. Usually we sit in the movie and television world, but we are going to jump out of that for a little bit. And explore some true crime, some unexplained phenomena, some horror culture in our new show called Scary Stories We Tell. We are both really, really excited about. I know we've already started recording and started doing some research and building up some social media stuff that's going to be fun for everybody to see. But we're still going to be doing this podcast as well, obviously, and Chris has a million other things that he will tell you about here in a moment. That Scary Stories We Tell, keep an eye out for that, because we are pumped.
Yeah, and like Jess mentioned, I have a couple podcasts that I'm on. Chronicles from the Crypt is one where we talk about Tales from the Crypt. I'm also on another podcast called Life and Times of Barney Miller, where we talk about the Barney Miller TV show. And also Dreams for Sale 1985, which is a podcast about the Twilight Zone from 1985. We need to pick the music for this at some point, which we should totally do after this if you have a moment. Mm-hmm. Big thanks, as always, to everyone, to our listeners. Head on over to oneseasonshow.com, where you can find this episode and all of our previous seasons. We kind of do this in a season format, which is the easiest way to do it. We're on all podcatchers, iOS, Android, Spotify, Google Music, everywhere that you can find a podcast. That's where we are, and we'll catch you on the next episode.